Archaeology, Individual Structures and Interesting Areas of Archaeology by Karl-James Langford. Today we're looking at the tree. Now, you may think that the tree itself isn't really of much interest to the archaeologist, the living, breathing tree. But today what we're going to be looking at is to see the uses of the tree to the archaeologist. This is the Fortingale tree. We start off with a Fortingale tree. This is believed to be the most ancient of trees in Britain. It's believed to be in excess of 5,000 years old. It's in Perth in Scotland. But more about that in a short while. One part of the landscape that we don't expect to see loads of ancient trees is the area of Exmoor. The word ancient should only derive from a tree that is extremely mature and extremely aged. Sometimes with a great girth, but obviously you're not going to get a great girth with a really old holly tree. And there's also something known as a veteran tree. That's a tree that's getting to maturity, is fairly old, but not in fact ancient. Is to remember when you're looking at trees and woodland to try and understand age. If a woodland has got a load of trees planted 100, 200 years ago, then to me it's not really to be classed as to be ancient. So what we should really think about next is landscapes that we find trees in areas hitherto been stripped by our ancestors. Some of these trees are in fact very ancient. Now we do find on the likes of Exmoor oak trees and yew trees that time has forgotten. And these trees themselves may have been left by our ancestors and rejuvenated many thousands of years ago because they were seen to mark something. They were seen to be special. We always used to think that the likes of Exmoor was stripped of all its trees 3,000–4,000 years ago, and at the time of the great eruption at Thera, approximately 1,628 years BC, quite precise there, most sites in the Western Hemisphere, which were occupied by farmers in upland areas, were completely abandoned because of climatic change. And we thought that the landscape was quite bereft of its very ancient trees because they'd all been stripped, but in fact that isn't exactly true when we look at Exmoor and one or two other places in Wales, upland Cumbria and parts of Scotland. It's not to be seen that we should just concentrate on the yew tree or the oak tree, but after all, the yew tree does actually live quite a considerable time. The oak tree lives quite a considerable time as well. The yew tree can outlive any tree by thousands of years. The oak tree can live up to 2,000 years. This is a very gnarled example on Exmoor. That there is something else. There is another tree that can help us understand something else in the archaeological landscape. On Exmoor we've got the beech trees. These beech trees are shown growing alongside a lane, a hollow lane. You can see the gnarled root system. Now, at one stage the road line was actually at the upper height of that bank, but over a period of time the bank has dropped and all you can see is the root system of the trees, and actually the floor of the road actually getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Again, trees help us understand archaeology a little bit better. This image of Exmoor in its finery, this is what you would really associate with Exmoor. And those very questions why we have ancient trees surviving is the very question of the importance of the yew and oak tree. Now, it's believed by some that you find yew trees planted where burials are to be. Some people believe that yew trees existed for another purpose prior, before burial grounds are erected around them. One other thing that can be said about landscapes is that you may find very ancient woodland, but the trees themselves are very gnarled and very thin, like the birches, like the hollies, like the hawthorn, where the root system only takes place very gently through the stubborn rocks that control the landscape. These are otherwise known as very ancient boulder woodlands, where the boulders haven't been removed by our human ancestors and the trees remain. In some circumstances you see the boulders. The trees have been stripped, where our human ancestors were unable to remove the boulders. There's an example near me in South Wales known as Hargrove Wood, which is a boulder woodland, where the trees have been stripped, but now we only see the boulders remaining, with fairly modern sycamore intermingling with this ancient stark landscape. One other sign of our human ancestors is to be very much seen incorporating bits and pieces that trees have growing on them, such as this bracket fungus in this illustration. You may have an archaeological site where you find bracket fungus, but no remains of beech trees surviving. But the bracket fungus proves that there were once beech trees growing in the vicinity, and we see these associated with the likes of Otzi the Iceman, 5,000 years old. We see these associated with the likes of Must Farm, which has been excavated near Peterborough. The Scots argue that their Fortingale tree is the most ancient of yew trees across the land, but the Welsh actually believe at Daufiniog that they have a very ancient yew tree themselves in the churchyard of St Ceiniog, Sennybridge, Powys. As you can see from this illustration, this tree absolutely dominates the landscape. And with this dominating of the landscape, it dominates those graves as well. The yew tree occupies the place of taking the gravestones, as Tennyson would say in Memoriam, the yew tree's roots are wrapped around the bones. The yew tree itself can contain gravestones which names are now bereft of the surface itself. The yew tree itself is a long-lasting tree. I believe in all my years as an archaeologist that the yew tree is the living embodiment of permanence. Where our ancestors 5,000 years ago decided in one instance to change from a tree to a stone because they thought stone would be more permanent. In fact, those earlier ancestors before that knew that trees would outlive man, and the tree would outlive, amazingly enough, the stone. And lots of these ancient yew trees in graveyards are the memoriam to that. Yew trees themselves can shape and change as the arc and crescent of the boughs of this tree split asunder into three. The aerial image here showing the dominance, the erectness of the tree across the cemetery, dominating the gravestones and the memory will be contained in the tree. That's at Daufiniog in Sennybridge, Powys. Fortingale tree itself is one of those memories. Some believe the tree is so ancient that it was here even before the last ice age. Let's look in order of importance here. The Fortingale tree may have been there as part of an ancient woodland. The Fortingale tree may have been planted by our ancestors to remember something, yes. The suggestion here I'm making today is that the tree itself may have been planted by our ancestors to remember something, or remember someone, or to mark something, not as some kind of religious pagan symbolism as archaeologists are obsessed with. The remains of the Fortingale tree, the mother and father of the what's left of the original tree, is to be found in front of us today, arced and preserved by some stones erected by man, but dominating it from the rear is one of its children. A forever recycling of this yew tree, its children now in dominance over the very, very ancient early Fortingale tree. Let's talk about this. Some believe it's over 5,000 years old. Some actually believe, and this is nonsense to me, that it's 12,000 years old. The ice would have covered Scotland at that stage, but maybe the Fortingale may be 6,000 to 7,000 years old. Think about it. that remembers everything. All the changes in the Neolithic period, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age. It remembers the Romans in Scotland. It remembers the medieval period. And it even remembers the Luftwaffe flying overhead. Here we see in 1822, we see an illustration of what the Fortingale tree may have looked like back then, split asunder. And all we have left now, 200 years later, is a slither of the parent of the yew trees that are otherwise across the landscape there today. To give an idea of scale, children sitting in the yew tree. Now, what we now move on to is the Morton Oak, the very ancient Morton Oak tree. This tree itself is split asunder, and apparently you can easily, it's said, 6 people can meet around a table there and have a meal in the boughs of this tree that's set asunder. This is a very ancient oak. It's very difficult to get an age of this oak now. It may be 1,500, 1,800, 2,000 years old. It remembers the Romans. It remembers the medieval period, the Vikings, everything since. But to get a core in the dendrochronology, it's difficult because the core wood is now gone and the outer bark is there. But with the heartwood gone, some dendrochronologists can still estimate, due to other tree rings nearby, the age of this very, very ancient tree in Morton in Cheshire. Similar name, this one, in Cumbria. The Lawton tree. The Lawton yew tree. This is alongside a river, a stream, in Lawton, Cumbria, near Cockermouth. The very interesting thing about this tree, has to be said, is that why is it alongside a stream, and why is it not present within a graveyard? That's an interesting one. That goes back to my theory that in fact yew trees may have been planted nothing to do with burials and pagan ritual landscapes. They may have been planted to remember something. Only the tree knows why it was planted, or then again, it may be a natural tree, living alongside the riverbank as it always has. This tree is in excess of 1,000 years old. And next, we move on to the tragedy of this. The Porthfadog tree, which used to stand in North Wales. The Porthfadog tree, up until April 2013, was a stentorial fat oak. A fat oak that remembers Owen of Gwyned's invasion of England to defeat Henry II over 800 years ago. And some believe that the tree was 400 years older than that. Some even believe it was so old that it was very difficult to get dendrochronology dating out of it. It was apparently the assembly point for the kings and princes of Wales as they would assault the English, as the English invaded over the border, and Owen of Gwynedd did defeat Henry II. But unfortunately, in April 2013, the tree was blown asunder. It's said that the local people had asked for this very ancient tree, this very living embodiment of history, this very living embodiment of archaeology, to be protected, to be supported. And when it was blown over, there were so many shenanigans of whether it should be re-erected, replaced up in sight, that by the time anyone got themselves organised, the tree withered and started to rot away. And at that point, by the end of April, it was too late. And Wales lost its very own piece of history, remembering the princes as they defeated the English. Almost hidden history, history that once was and is no longer there because we allowed our history to go and wither. Remember the likes of the Carmarthen oak tree that used to meet people as they entered Carmarthen many years ago, remembering not burials, remembering an event, remembering people. All these old oak trees and yew trees are to be cherished. In Denmark, for example, they passed laws many years ago to protect these oak trees as living embodiment of archaeology and other trees in places like Denmark and across the world that are protected. We in this turn in this land need to preserve our oak trees, our yew trees, our ancient beech trees, and so on. And thank you for watching and listening to this video. This is Karl-James Langford for my video log. Thank you very much.